All right, I have with me today Scott Ritter. There's a lot going on with new explosions coming out of Crimea. It's being called a terrorist attack. It's shut down the Crimean bridge. So we definitely want to go through that. We also want to talk a little bit about what else is going on in the region. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you give my audience a little background? I know it's not even been 48 hours, but we have this terrorist attack that has happened on the bridge in Crimea. Can you give us a little bit of background, and then we'll discuss a little bit further what you think is going on with this attack?
Well, certainly. I think, first of all, we have to focus on Crimea itself. It's a point of some contention. Crimea is historically a Russian territory. In the 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev, who was at that time the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and himself an ethnic Ukrainian, gifted Crimea to Ukraine. There's various stories about why that happened. Some people say that it dealt with contractual complexities, meaning that uh, entities that were in Ukraine who were trying to do business in Crimea. Um, it just took too long for the contracts because one had to go through Moscow, the other through Kiev, and so to simplify this, they just simply made Crimea Kiev. Who knows? That's anecdotal, but the point is, the primarily ethnic Russian population of Crimea found itself in the Soviet Republic of Ukraine, which, given that the Soviet Union was run out of Moscow, wasn't the end of the world. But it became the end of the world for these people in 1991, 1992, when Ukraine became independent from the Soviet Union. And there, there began a long, decades long, gradual ramping up of animosity between the ethnic Russians of Crimea and the Ukrainian government, whom they believed treated them poorly because of their ethnic Russian status. There was also tension between Ukraine and Russia over the Sevastopol naval base. This is the key to Russia's security posture in the Black Sea. It's where the Black Sea Fleet is based out of. Um, and so Russia, signed a leasing agreement with the Ukrainian government to keep the Russian fleet there and the Russian service members there. In 2014, there was a coup, a revolution, however you want to call it, in Kiev, where the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych was ousted by people who were aligned with Ukrainian nationalists, and they began to prosecute, some would say persecute, the ethnic Russians of Ukraine, including Crimea and the Donbass. Crimea declared its independence. Russian forces intervened, and within short order, Russia annexed Crimea into Russia. A move that has been rejected by the Ukrainians and by the West at large. Crimea is isolated from Russia, at least was at that time in 2014. And one of the things that the Ukrainians did is dam the canal that connects the Dnieper River with Crimea, a supply of fresh water that made Crimean agriculture and indeed made life in Crimea easier. They dammed it, cutting Crimea off from water, threatening to turn Crimea into a desert. And then it also isolated the people of Crimea. So Vladimir Putin ordered that a bridge be built. Now, people have been talking about building a bridge between Crimea and the Krasnodar region in southern Russia for some time now, but it's been deemed to be one of the more difficult engineering feats. Putin ordered it done, and it was done within a very short order. Russia built a very impressive bridge. I actually drove over it in May when I went to Crimea on my book tour. It's an impressive structure, and they creating connectivity now. So now there's a direct link between Crimea and Russia itself. This has been a sore point for the Ukrainians, made even more so after February of 2022, when Russia began its special military operation. One of the Ukrainian goals have been in this conflict to evict Russia from the territories that it has occupied, both in the Donbass but also Crimea. Um, the Ukrainians view the bridge as a legitimate military target, a strategic line of communication. Indeed, Russia does transit military equipment over this bridge. So, under the law of war, it's a legitimate military target. Ukraine has struck it twice. Now, the first time they struck it using the tools of terrorism. So, one could have called this a terrorist attack. A car bomb driven by a civilian, witting or unwittingly, went off on the bridge. That is a terrorist act. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But this current act appears to be an act of done by the Ukrainian military, or at least special services, using a weapon that people can recognize as being military in nature. Russia has called this a terrorist act. The reason why is that Russia is not at war with Ukraine, and Ukraine has not declared war against Russia. People need to understand that there's fighting going on, but from a legal structural standpoint, Russia is not at war with Ukraine. And so, from the Russian perspective, this bridge, which connects Krasnodar region of Russia, which is a peaceful region, no martial law declared, part of Russia, with Crimea, is a civilian structure, and it was struck. Two civilians died, and they call this a terrorist act. From the Ukrainian perspective, it's a legitimate military target. What's of significance here is that the Ukrainians, by attacking this bridge, may have pushed Russia to a point where it reconsiders its approach. As bad as things look in Ukraine towards the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people need to understand this. Russia is not treating and has not treated Ukraine as a nation that it's at war yet, meaning that there's a lot of things that are allowed to continue to happen in Ukraine that would not happen if Russia was at war with Ukraine. And by attacking this bridge, the Ukrainians may have actually created some political impetus to push Russia over the edge and start considering actions that up until now it has not been willing to undertake, like dropping strategic bridges across the Dnieper River, dropping bridges and shutting down tunnels that connect Ukraine with Romania, with Hungary, with Poland. These critical infrastructure items, which under war would have been bombed on day one. I'm just telling you, as an American who participated in targeting Iraq during Desert Storm, I know that which of I speak. And if this was a conflict with the United States attacking Ukraine, all of these targets would have been dropped by now. Russia hasn't touched them, and it's greatly facilitated the Ukrainians' ability to transit NATO equipment across the border to the front lines. So, from a military standpoint, it makes no sense why Russia has kept these bridges up, why Russia has allowed certain things to happen. But the reason is political, that Russia is not at war with Ukraine. So therefore, it is limiting that which it bombs to the immediate, the direct impact on the battlefield, not the overall impact on Ukraine. But this attack against the bridge may change that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I read this morning that this bridge is a big source of pride for Vladimir Putin. It
Yep.
was a big connector. They worked very quickly, as you said. It was an architectural feat. Do you think the attack on this is more of trying to shut down the region, or is this a televised attack on Putin's ego and something that he loves? What are your thoughts on that? And then let's go a little bit deeper on the actual attack.
I think it's both. I think that the Ukrainians are right now they have a counteroffensive that's not achieving its objectives. One of the purposes of the counteroffensive is to drive and disconnect the land bridge that's been created. Remember, this bridge, the Kerch Bridge, the Crimea Bridge, connects Crimea with southern Russia, with the Krasnodar region. And that was necessary because prior to the 2022 special military operation, there was no land bridge. You couldn't drive from Crimea to Russia without going through Ukraine. but because of the military operation, because of the annexation of Kherson and Zaporizhia, there's now a land bridge that connects Crimea with Russia. And so one of the goals of the Ukrainians in their counteroffensive was to sever this land bridge, either directly by punching through the Russian defenses and making physical contact with the Sea of Azov, or through fire by bringing the Ukrainian forces close enough to the highway that connects Crimea through Melitopol, Mariupol, and Russia, and put that under artillery fire. So you sever this line of communication. And that's critical for starving the Russian forces that are currently in the Kherson Zaporizhia area. The supplies that Russia brings for these forces comes from the land bridge, but also across the bridge, the Crimea bridge. And so you have a counteroffensive that hasn't succeeded in cutting the land bridge. So the feeling is if you could blow the real bridge, the Crimea bridge, you could begin the process of starving the Russians of the support that's necessary to continue the defense and enable the Ukrainians to launch through. So there's a legitimate military reasoning behind this. But as you also pointed out, this is one of Vladimir Putin's flagship projects. This was a very important project for him. It helped convince the people of Crimea that Russia wouldn't abandon them, and it helped the people of Russia to understand the risks, political risks that Putin took in bringing Crimea into the fold. While emotionally many Russians agree that Crimea is Russia and is forever Russia, the ramifications of absorbing Crimea, because remember, for 2 decades it had been under the rule of the Ukrainian government. The infrastructure had collapsed. It was not up to Russian standards, and by bringing in Crimea without a plan, there was no plan for this. It literally the coup took place in February, and by March the nationalists were threatening Ukraine, and by April Russia had taken Crimea, and by April Russia had taken it. And so now Russia has absorbed this territory with no plan. How do we proceed from here? They were thinking, how do we afford this? Where's the budget going to come from to bring Crimea up to Russian standards, which is an obligation now that it's part of Russia? And Putin was able to go around Russia and get different districts to adopt certain parts of Crimea and say, this is our responsibility. And so they would take their part of their budget and donate it to Crimea. So that was one thing. But in order to make that viable, you still needed to have, the economic connectivity. And that's what the bridge did. Putin, by building this bridge, sent a signal that he is committed to making Crimea part of Russia, that Russia should be committed. It was a bridge that united Russia with Crimea, and Vladimir Putin has his name written all over it. So, yeah, by attacking this is putting a thumb in the eye of Vladimir Putin and his project. So I think Ukrainians are accomplishing both objectives by attacking this bridge, and that's why the Russian response is going to be of a order of magnitude greater than it would be normally, because there's not just the military aspect of this attack, but there's the political aspect as well.
Okay. And just to be clear, it looks like this looks like something out of a Mission Impossible movie, but basically they took a remote controlled jet ski